Hi everyone, I'm historical romance author Elizabeth Ellen Carter. It is my absolute delight and privilege to introduce you to Elizabeth Keysian, who joins me in the Dragonblade anthology Upon a Midnight Dreary that comes out on the 21st of October. Elizabeth, hello, how are you?
Hi there, Elizabeth. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we had an absolutely fantastic brief from Kathryn, and it was find a British ghost and write a ghostly romantic story based on that ghost, which that was just, well, such a wide open brief. So tell me what you thought about that and what ghost you eventually chose.
Well, it's a lovely brief, as you say, because it gives so much room for using one's imagination, but it also links into actual oral history, you know, because a lot of these stories of ghosts are ones that have been handed down over time. I decided to go for a rather skewed to people. I'm afraid that's me. I'm a bit eccentric. I thought I'm going to get a ghost that nobody's ever heard of, and I'm going to make it famous. I used to live in a small village in Essex, in UK, and it had a lot of lovely old timber-framed houses. So it had at least medieval, if not Tudor, Tudor era or earlier origins. And it was really nice to see the timber-framed houses sort of surviving into the modern era. So living in a village that was that old, it's hardly surprising that there were a few stories about ghosts. We had a story that I learned about a ghost just up the road. Now we're talking outside the village, we're talking a very lonely, isolated country road that, you know, it looks as if it's going absolutely nowhere. And there was a bridge on a corner, and the bridge is called Patience Bridge. Now, it's very creepy driving along there at night. My parents sometimes would go out that way to go to a country pub, and I would be a child sort of sitting in the back, and we'd come home at night and the headlights would be on and creating this sort of strange grey glow off the trunks of the trees as we came home, and strange reflections as we went over Patience Bridge over the river there and back home. So I already had a feeling of the area as being quite creepy. But the story went that there was an old witch, or the ghost of an old witch, that lived on this bridge. And what she wanted to do was to pull unwary travellers down over the edge of the bridge and into the water and drown them. So that was the story. Some people have got slightly different variations of the story. I've discovered that since I've joined in with a Facebook group for people who used to live in this village, Roxwell, and they had slightly different variants. But there was definitely a more modern story about somebody whose tractor went over on the bridge, and they all said, oh, the old witch, you know, she's not letting go of it, because of course they had a lot of trouble getting something as big as a tractor out of a river. Yeah. Oh, the old witch, she's hanging on to it. So I thought, well, there's definitely got to be something in this story if people are still referring to it. I wanted to see that ghost. I really did. I was fascinated by ghosts when I was a teenager. I would have loved to have seen one, even though it probably would have frightened me. And then one day I had a rather strange experience. I was with a group of friends, and we were having a bit of fun in the countryside at Midsummer's Eve. And this was the time that the ghost was meant to appear. And we thought, right, you know, as teenagers do, let's walk up to Patience Bridge at midnight and we'll see the ghost. And so that was the plan. Unfortunately, it absolutely bucketed it with rain. Through the puddles and absolutely soaking wet, and decided that we weren't going to go and see the ghost at Patience Bridge. We went to somebody's house in the middle of town, nice, warm, cozy, well lit. And then for some reason, I don't know why, I just happened to look at my watch at midnight, which was the time that the ghost was supposed to appear at Patience Bridge. And I just got this vision, this really strong vision of a woman floating face down under the bridge with long hair trailing out behind her. It really gave me the shivers. So I was very glad to be in company at the time, because it completely freaked me out. But, that was probably just my imagination. But anyway, I decided that because there was a legend and because I imagined I'd seen her, that I was going to put her into my Upon a Midnight Dreary story. So she's in there. She's not there as an old witch. She's actually there as the Grey Lady of Patience Bridge. Basically, she sort of killed herself as the result of a failed love affair, which could have happened. That could actually have happened. That could be where the whole story comes from. It's a dodgy corner. You might throw yourself off the bridge and drown yourself if you were depressed, or you might have an accident. You could have a carriage turn over if the horses were going too quickly. So that's what I've based my little spooky story on, the Grey Lady of Patience Bridge in Roxwell.
So your hero and heroine go out in search of the Grey Lady, or does the Grey Lady find them? How does that tie in with the romance? Because I was saying to some of the other authors, you like the chills down your spine with a ghost story, but with introducing a romance as well, there's this balance that you're striking between something a little spooky, but also something that warms the heart as love does.
Absolutely. Well, my hero and heroine do actually go out to find the ghost, but there is a male ghost involved as well, and he's the one who starts off the story, because he's sort of stalking my heroine. She keeps having bad luck, and she sees things out of the corner of her eye that worry her, and she thinks a skull and broken a skull.
Right.
So she's the hero is trying to convince her that there's no such thing as ghosts, but he does actually eventually see this sort of scary figure stalking her, and so he comes to believe that there are ghosts, and they decide that they're going to reunite the two ghosts. They're going to take the skull and try and put it somewhere where the spirit will stop. What do spirits do? Being restless. They need to put this restless spirit to rest, and finally know where it should be. But I stole the idea of the screaming skull is something that pops up quite a lot in English tradition and folklore, where there's a story that if the skull is removed from the house, then there will be disaster. The skull will scream and the house will be consumed by fire or water, or there'll be war, or there'll be a death, or something like that. So we've got quite a violent screaming skull male ghost, and then we've got a fairly gentle, rather sad female ghost. But people will have to wait until the story comes out to find out what it is that actually links them together, and what is actually done to sort things out and to give the living hero and heroine a happy ending.
I love it. I love it.
I've got another ghost as well. The springs from the last book in my Tudor Trysts and Treachery series. All of these are set in either the Henry VIII time or Elizabeth I time in the Tudor era. So the last book is set in the time of Henry VIII, and the actual location to live as the sort of custodian. Pressing Temple is an absolutely ancient site. There are Roman remains, Bronze Age remains there. Two massive 13th century barns, the biggest and oldest barns surviving in Europe. So it's a place where people come to visit. It's a little bit of a tourist trap. But we lived there as custodians for a while because my partner was being an archaeologist. So we were excavating in the walled garden at Cressing Temple, and we got to know some of the local people fairly well, and we were told that there was a ghost in the house that we were living in, and he was called the Hall Man. And every time I heard those two words together, I got shivers, the Hall Man, because at one point we were living in the front part of the house, and if you wanted to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, you had to cross the hall. I was going to see this ghost at the hall. But we had cats, and the cats never seemed to behave as if there was anything untoward in the area. So I thought, oh, that's all a load of bunk, and that, you know, there's no such ghost as the Hall Man. The only person we knew in living history who'd seen it had been the child of one of the people who'd worked the farm at Cressing Temple. And this child had described somebody in wearing costume like a 17th century cavalier from the English Civil War, right, with a great big broad-brimmed hat and the big sort of lacy sleeves and everything. And he'd seen him in the hall. He'd also seen him walk through the wall, which is often what happens if a building has changed since when the ghost was alive. So the ghost is going through a modern wall that wouldn't have been there in its own time. This is all theory, of course. But so the kid had seen the Hall Man. And then in later years, when I was talking to somebody who was also an archaeologist on the same site, I mentioned this, and he said, "Oh, I've seen it." I said, "What? You've seen it?" And he said, "Yes," he said. "I went in to the hall in the house, and," he said, "I saw this sort of filmy grey shape on the stairs." And again, I got the shivers because I thought, well, that shouldn't have been there. And you know, you're a modern thinking person, and yet you believe you saw this ghost. So I'm sure there was a real ghost at Cressing Temple. And I'd like to think that it doesn't mind that I've kind of tinkered with it a bit in order to put it into a story, which is set at the location where this ghost was actually seen.
I love it. I love it. Well, I don't have any ghost stories. I think the closest that I've got was a story that my mother-in-law told my husband. She was doing some cleaning one night at a pub, and pub had closed for the night, and she kept seeing a figure out of the corner of her eye, and she had a bit of a sixth sense. So she, you know, after turning around swiftly once and seeing nothing there, she thought, no, there's definitely something out of the corner of my eye. So over this period of time, she just pretended not to notice until one day she turned around slowly, and this coachman was sitting there, sort of hunched over as if he might have a pint. And my mother-in-law said, sort of, "Who are you?" And he told her the story that his cart had overturned in the green, which had a pond in it, and he drowned.
That's amazing, isn't it? That is amazing. That is amazing. I mean, I do feel that there's something in it. I've recently written an article for a magazine called Historical Times, which is people who write historical novels have all sort of contributed to it. And the one that comes out on the 1st of September has got an article on Tudor ghosts. And I did a bit of research, ghosts from the Tudor era. It was Britain sort of switching from Catholic to Protestant, back to Catholic, back to Protestant. A time of great uncertainty and instability, and a lot of people getting their heads chopped off or being hanged or whatever. So, you know, there were bound to have been some traumatic incidents and restless spirits created. One of the nastiest stories that I came across when I was researching this was of somebody called Lady Hobie, who I believe lived at Bisham Abbey in Hertfordshire. Right. And she was an adult when Elizabeth I was still quite young. And she had several children, this lady, Lady Hobie. she herself was a great scholar. She could read Greek and Latin, and was very skilled and accomplished for a woman of her time. She wanted her children to be great scholars as well.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them was a bit slow-witted. That was what they would have said in those days. He was slow-witted. And so she was frequently punishing this poor child for not learning his alphabet and blotting his copybook, and not. And he's supposed to have had some kind of problem with his brain. And one day she beat him so hard that he fell seriously ill and he died. Of course, she was very remorseful after this. And she kind of carried the burden of guilt to the end of her life. So her restless spirit, her guilty spirit is seen wafting around Bisham Abbey with a bowl in front of it, a bowl of water, and it's just floating in front of her, and she's washing her hands, trying to wash off the blood. And like Lady Macbeth, washing the guilt off her hands for inadvertently killing her son. So that's how the spirit was generally seen. And then it's 17th century, Vice Admiral Vansittart. Now there's a name to conjure with. So not a silly person by any means. Mm-hmm. Quite a pillar of the community. He was staying in this house, and he actually was sort of half looking at a portrait of Lady Hoby out of the corner of his eye, and then he felt a presence, and he saw the ghost, the spectre of Lady Hoby. And when he looked up at the portrait, it was empty. She stepped down out of the portrait to haunt him.
I
so,
like
creepy,
that one.
I like that one. Yeah.
Do you think you would incorporate ghosts into another series, or maybe do something with supernatural elements at some future point? Or
I honestly don't know. Let's wait and see how this one goes, because it's the first time I've ever written anything like that, and I wasn't sure if I could. And I still don't know if I succeeded, because the book's not out there yet. So I don't know how the story will be received. Probably not. I think I would probably rather, if I'm interested in that sort of thing, just pursue it as a hobby rather than try and write about it. But it's definitely a very interesting and intriguing subject. I mean, I used to work in a museum, and it was quite surprising the number of people to ask about the history of a certain place or a certain area. And once I'd talked to them for a bit, they would admit the reason that they wanted to know about the history of this place was because they thought it was haunted. I've met a lot of people, modern people, who are convinced that they are actually experiencing ghostly happenings and poltergeists and things like that. Unfortunately, I've never been able to that used to be an orphanage and all the children died mysteriously. I haven't been able to say that because I haven't been able to find out that information. It's not easy to find historical information for an individual building, no matter how old it is, unless it's a really, it's a big major
building.
one. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's interesting. It's sort of thinking about the psychology that might affect this need to believe in ghosts, that to think there's something beyond this mortal veil. I think it says a lot about sort of how tenuously we tend to try and continue this thread of of life from one generation to the next, and finding this point of connection. The ghosts live in us, I guess.
Yes, I mean, I'd like to know. I'd like to know scientifically whether they really are ghosts or not. And as I said, I would quite like to encounter one, because if I encountered one, then I would know they were real.
Yeah.
I've been in a situation where I ought to have seen ghosts. I mean, going back to Cressing Temple, which is where I based my 5th Trysts and Treachery book, Lord of the Manor. There were a whole bunch of skeletons that had been excavated from the Templar era chapel on the site. They had been processed by the archaeologists. They'd been looked at by the scientists, and they were in storage in the garage, in the place where we parked our car, because there wasn't a lot of space. There, as I said, apart from this one couple of people who saw what they said was the hallman, a cavalier, who's completely the wrong date for the Templar era, which, you know, the 1300s, 1200s mainly, and before. I never got any spooky, creepy feelings from these remains. We never saw anything strange. They were eventually reburied on the site where they had originally been put, and they all seemed perfectly happy there. But going on to another archaeological site, which is in Trowbridge in Wiltshire, where I am now, there were skeletons excavated from that site, again from a chapel, and they all went off to various places to be studied. They hadn't actually returned to the museum at that point, but then a shopping centre was built over the place where the skeletons had originally been buried. The museum was already there because it had been part of an old woolen mill, and it was a listed building, so it remained. So what became the museum was there. The shopping centre was built around it. People in one of the shops started experiencing poltergeist phenomena, and this shop had been built directly over the place where the skeletons had been and where they'd been disinterred.
Right.
There were things, you know, things flying around the shop, and doors opening and windows opening and slamming when there was nobody there, and footsteps and that kind of thing. They were quite creeped out by it. Eventually those skeletons were all got together, and they were buried properly with a proper ceremony and everything, and nobody reported any poltergeist. You ask yourself, how real was it? What did it really happen? Was it the skeletons that were causing it? Because it didn't happen at Cressing Temple, so why should it happen at it was imagination? Did they already know? Did they know they were over a burial ground? And did that sort of fire their overactive imaginations?
Yeah, and I think that might have a lot to do with it too. Sort of as Fox Mulder says, you know, I want to believe, and I think sometimes put a theory past you, and I've read this ages ago, that the explanation for some ghosts, some auditory hallucinations and some visual hallucinations is the silica in some of the stone that rubs together can sometimes, you know, give a flash of light which you catch out of the corner of your eye. And I'd also read ages ago that a particular frequency which is sort of outside sort of normal hearing, but that frequency can give you the creepy vibe, and it can sometimes be associated with the flickering of some fluoro lighting. So I think there might be a mixture of a lot of those things coming together to continue the legends, to continue those stories on.
If flickering lights can trigger epileptic fits in people, they obviously, you know, do have a strong effect on the brain. They can trigger migraines in people. So why couldn't they trigger some other kind of issue in the brain and you know, create a vision of some sort.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for sharing all of these ghostly tales. Everyone, Upon a Midnight Dreary will be out on October 21. It's a great anthology from Dragonblade Publishing. It's only 99 cents, so you need to pre-order now. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And we'll see everyone next time. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and we will see you next time with another great interview.